The first snow of the season had come early, and Sable was not ready for it. She stood on the crooked porch of the cabin she had built with her own hands, watching the flakes drift down through the pines like ash from a fire that burned somewhere beyond the clouds. The wind carried the smell of frozen earth and cedar, and the faintest trace of something animal moving through the timber below. Deer, probably. She would need to set snares before the drifts grew too deep. 3 years. 3 years since she had climbed this mountain with nothing but a hunting knife, a stolen bedroll, and the kind of emptiness that sits in your chest like a stone you cannot cough up. 3 years since the Ashford pack had gathered in the ceremonial hall, and Alpha Cresswell had stood before them all and spoken the words that had ended her. She remembered the torchlight, the way it had flickered across the faces of people she had known her entire life. She remembered looking for someone, anyone, who might speak up. Brenna, who she had shared meals with since childhood. Josiah, who she had bandaged after his first failed shift when he was 14. None of them moved. None of them opened their mouths. They stood like statues carved from the same cowardice, and they let it happen. Not a single one of them had looked at her when Cresswell said it. This Omega is rejected. She carries no scent bond. She holds no rank. She belongs to no wolf in this pack. 22 years old, parentless since she was 9, when a border skirmish had taken her mother and father in the same night. Raised by the pack because obligation demanded it, not because anyone had wanted the orphan girl with the quiet wolf and the habit of asking too many questions. She had scrubbed their floors. She had tended their sick. She had spent her adolescence making herself useful in every way she could think of, because useful was the only thing that kept you from being discarded. And in one sentence, Cresswell had made official what everyone had always known. Sable was nothing. She had not screamed. She had not begged. She had stood there while her wolf howled inside her chest like a creature with its leg caught in a trap, and she had looked at the floor, and she had nodded. Then she had walked out of the hall and kept walking until the valley was behind her, and the mountain was beneath her feet, and the air was too thin for anyone to follow. No one had followed. She had listened for it, those first few days. The sound of footsteps behind her on the trail, a voice calling her name. The mountain had answered with wind and silence, and eventually she had stopped listening. That first winter had nearly killed her. She did not know how to build a shelter that could survive the weight of mountain snow. She did not know which streams stayed liquid through the freeze. She did not know that the pretty red berries on the low bushes near the south face would leave her vomiting for 2 days straight, curled beneath a rock shelf while the temperature dropped to something that should have stopped her heart. She learned by almost dying, repeatedly, and something stubborn and furious inside her refused to stop breathing. Some part of her wanted to prove that an Omega with no rank, no bond, and no pack could survive what should have been unsurvivable. And some part of her, the honest part, was simply too angry to die. By the second winter, she had the cabin. Rough, ugly, drafty in places, but standing. She had a smokehouse for venison, a root cellar carved into the hillside. She had learned to read the weather by the way the jays behaved in the morning, and she had stopped flinching at the sound of wolves howling in the distance, because the wolves on this mountain were not shifters. They were just wolves. And they left her alone, which was more than her own kind had ever managed. By the third winter, this one, she had stopped thinking about the valley entirely. Mostly. There were nights when the loneliness hit without warning, a sudden gutting ache that came out of nowhere and left her sitting on the edge of her bed with her fists pressed against her eyes, breathing through her teeth until it passed. Sable pulled her coat tighter and stepped off the porch. The snow was already ankle-deep and falling faster. She needed firewood. She needed to check the eastern snare line. She needed to patch the gap where the wind had peeled back a section of tar paper on the smokehouse roof. What she did not need was what she found when she crested the ridge above the tree line and looked down into the narrow draw that led to her cabin from the south. 10 wolves, massive, dark-furred, moving in formation through the snow with the kind of discipline that had nothing to do with nature and everything to do with military training. Shifters. And at their center, walking upright in the knee-deep powder like it cost him nothing, was the largest man she had ever seen. He was enormous. Not just tall, though he was that too, but broad and dense in a way that made the ancient pines on either side of him look like kindling. His hair was black and fell past his jaw in a way that the wind kept lifting and throwing across his face. He wore a long, dark coat that did nothing to conceal the width of his shoulders or the sheer physical authority that radiated from him like heat from a forge. Sable's wolf, dormant for 3 years, silent through every lonely night and frozen morning, slammed awake inside her chest so hard she staggered. She caught herself against a boulder. Her breath came ragged and white in the freezing air. Her hands were shaking, and it had nothing to do with the cold. "No," she whispered. The man below stopped walking. His head turned. He looked up the ridge, directly at her, across 200 yards of falling snow, like he had heard her whisper, like he had felt her wolf wake. His eyes were the color of a winter river, pale, gray, almost silver in the flat light. And when they found hers, Sable felt something crack open in her chest that she had spent 3 years sealing shut. He started walking toward her. Sable turned and ran. She did not make it far. Not because he was fast, though he was. Not because the snow slowed her, though it did. She did not make it far because her wolf turned mutinous the moment she tried to flee. 3 years of silence. 3 years of nothing. And now the creature inside her was clawing at her ribs, howling, pulling her backward with a force she had never felt before. It was like trying to run against a river current that flowed through the center of her chest. Sable stumbled through the door of her cabin, slammed it shut, and dropped the heavy crossbar into place. Her back hit the wood and she slid to the floor, chest heaving, her pulse a wild, hammering thing that filled her skull. "Think," she told herself. "Think, think, think." 10 wolves. A man that size. That scent. Because she could smell him now even through the closed door, cedar and iron and something deep and warm that made her wolf whine with desperate recognition. Whoever he was not from Ashford. That was not a valley scent. That was something older, something vast, and the dominance rolling off him even from 200 yards away had been crushing. No alpha she had ever encountered had carried that kind of weight. This was different. This was oceanic. A knock at the door. Not a pounding. Not a demand. A single knock, firm and measured, like he had all the time in the world. Sable pressed her palms flat against the floorboards and did not move. "I know you are in there." His voice came through the wood, low and unhurried, and the sound of it did something terrible to her composure. It was deep and calm and carried the kind of quiet authority that did not need volume. "I am not here to harm you." "Then leave," Sable said. A pause. She heard the snow creak beneath his weight as he shifted. "I cannot do that," he said. "You have 10 wolves and 2 legs. You absolutely can." Another pause, longer this time. She thought she heard something that might have been a breath of laughter, but it was gone before she could be sure. "My name is Caldrus Vane," he said. "I am the Alpha King of the Northern Reaches." Sable's stomach dropped. The Northern Reaches, the largest unified territory on the continent, 6 packs bound under a single crown, stretching from the frozen coast to the gray winter mountains. Every wolf in every pack on every piece of land she had ever known answered in some way to the King of the Northern Reaches, and he was standing on her porch. "Congratulations," Sable said through the door. "You are still not coming in." "It is -14 degrees, Caldrus said mildly. "And it is getting worse. You are a shifter. You will survive. My wolves have been traveling for 6 days. They need shelter." That gave her pause. She hated that it gave her pause. She hated that the thought of 10 exhausted wolves freezing in the snow made something twist in her gut, because caring about wolves, about Pack, about anyone other than herself, was the exact thing she had climbed this mountain to stop doing. "There is a rock overhang a quarter-mile east," she said, "below the second ridge. It blocks the wind." "I am aware of it," Caldress said. "I am not asking for my wolves. I am asking for you." Sable frowned. "What?" "Open the door and I will explain." She should not have opened it. Every survival instinct she had built over 3 years of solitude told her to keep that crossbar down and wait him out. Kings did not climb mountains for omegas. Whatever he wanted, it could not be good for her. But her wolf was pressing forward so hard her vision was blurring at the edges, and beneath the fear and the anger, there was a pull. Deep and constant and centered somewhere behind her sternum, dragging her toward the door like a hook set in her ribs. Sable lifted the crossbar. She opened the door. He filled the doorway completely. The top of her head did not reach his collarbone. This close, his scent hit her like a wall, and she could see the details that distance had hidden. The scar that ran along the left side of his jaw, thin and silver. The sheer density of him, muscle layered over a frame built for war, held in check by a stillness that was more intimidating than any display of force. His pale eyes moved over her face. Then they dropped to her neck, the place where a scent bond should have sat, bare and unmarked, and something shifted in his expression. Something that looked, impossibly, like recognition. "You are Sable Marin," he said. Not a question. Her blood went cold. "How do you know my name?" she asked. He looked at her for a long moment. Behind him, through the curtain of falling snow, the wolves were arranged in a wide perimeter around the cabin, heads low, ears forward, watching. "Because I have been looking for you," Caldress said, "for 2 years." Sable stared at him. The fire behind her cracked and spat. The wind screamed through the pines. "You need to start explaining," she said, "right now." She let him in because the alternative was standing in an open doorway in a blizzard while staring up at a man whose presence made her wolf do things she could not control. It was a practical decision. She told herself that 3 times while he ducked through the doorframe and straightened to his full height inside her cabin. He did not fit. The ceiling was low, built for a woman who stood 5'4", and Caldress Vane had to keep his head slightly bent to avoid the crossbeam. His shoulders blocked the light from the fire. "Sit down," she said, gesturing to the stump she used as a chair. "Before you put your head through my roof." He sat. Even sitting, he was enormous. Sable stayed standing. She leaned against the far wall and crossed her arms and kept the full width of the cabin between them. "Talk," she said. 2 years ago," he began, "a sickness started spreading through my territory. Not a disease. Something else. Wolves losing their ability to shift. The change would simply stop. One day they were whole, and the next their wolf was gone. Silent. Unreachable." Sable's arms tightened across her chest. "It started in the outer settlements," Caldress continued. "A handful of wolves at first. We thought it was isolated, but it spread. Within 6 months, it had reached the inner packs. Within a year, it was in the capital." "How many?" Sable asked. 312 wolves have lost their ability to shift, as of the count taken before I left to find you." The number sat between them like a physical thing. "That is not a sickness," Sable said. "No," Caldress agreed. "It is a curse. Our seers trace the origin to a relic," he continued, "an ancient binding stone unearthed during a border excavation. One of my commanders brought it into the capital before anyone understood what it was. The stone is gone now, shattered. But the curse it carried embedded itself into the territory, like roots into soil. It feeds on the bond between wolf and shifter. It severs what should be inseparable." Sable's mouth had gone dry. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because every seer, every healer, every scholar I have consulted in 2 years has told me the same thing," he said. The curse can only be broken by a wolf who has survived total severance and come back. A wolf who lost everything: pack, bond, identity, and rebuilt from nothing. He paused. You are the only wolf on this continent who fits that description. Sable laughed. It came out sharp and bitter and too loud in the small cabin. You climbed a mountain in a blizzard with 10 wolves because some seer told you a rejected Omega could save your kingdom, she said. That is the most ridiculous thing anyone has ever said to me, and I once had an alpha tell me I was too broken to be useful to anyone. Something dangerous flickered across Caldress's face, a flash of fury so controlled it barely disturbed his expression, but Sable felt it through her wolf like a shockwave. Who said that to you? He asked, his voice very quiet. It does not matter. The point is, you have the wrong person. I am not some mystical savior. I am a woman who lives alone on a mountain because nobody wanted her. My wolf barely functions. I have not shifted in 3 years. And yet she woke the moment you saw me, Caldress said. Sable's mouth closed. The silence stretched. His pale eyes held hers and she could not look away. You felt it, he said. Not accusing. Not triumphant. Just certain. When you saw me on the ridge, your wolf recognized something. My wolf is confused, Sable managed. Or she knows exactly what she is doing, Caldress said, and you are the one who is afraid. The words hit something raw and unprotected in her chest. She flinched. You need to leave, she said. Caldress did not move. I will not force you, he said. I will not command you. I do not have that right, but I need you to understand what is at stake. He leaned forward. 312 wolves are trapped inside human bodies, cut off from the other half of their soul. That number grows every week. Children, Sable. Some of them are children. She turned away from him because she could not let him see her face. I will leave in the morning, Caldress continued. If you choose to come with us, we leave at dawn. If you choose to stay, I will not return. He stood and moved toward the door, ducking beneath the crossbeam. I was told you would refuse, he said, without turning around. I was told an Omega with your history would never trust an Alpha again. But I have spent 2 years searching for you. I have walked through territories that wanted me dead, tracked rumors across 6 mountain ranges and climbed to the top of this one in a blizzard because every path led here. He opened the door. The cold hit her like a slap. You are not what they told you, he said over his shoulder. You never were. The door closed behind him. Sable stood alone in her cabin, the fire dying, and pressed both hands against her sternum where her wolf was howling so loud it hurt to breathe. 312 wolves, children, a curse that severed the bond between human and animal. And a king who had searched for 2 years and climbed a mountain in a blizzard to find a woman the world had thrown away. She did not sleep that night. At dawn, she packed her bag, banked the fire, and stepped outside into the pale pink light. Caldress stood at the edge of the tree line with his wolves, waiting. He saw her and something passed across his face that was too brief and too unguarded for her to name. She walked toward him, and they descended the mountain together. But halfway down the southern slope, when the altitude thinned and the trees grew dense, Sable's wolf surged without warning. A wall of sensation crashed over her, staggering and electric and impossible to ignore. Her knees buckled, her vision whited out at the edges, and through the ringing in her ears she heard her own wolf screaming a single word she had never heard before, never felt before, never believed she would feel. Mate. Sable hit the snow on her knees and looked up at Caldress, who had turned at the sound of her fall, and the expression on his face told her everything. He already knew. He caught her before she hit the ground a second time. One moment she was falling, and the next his arm was around her waist, and she was pressed against his chest with her face buried in the hollow of his throat. His scent flooded her lungs and her wolf went absolutely feral. Sable shoved herself away from him so hard she stumbled backward into a snowbank. Do not touch me, she gasped. Caldress stood where she had left him, his arms still half extended, his expression carefully controlled. But she could see his chest rising and falling too fast. She could see the way his hands curled slowly into fists at his sides. You knew, she said, her voice shaking. Before you climbed that mountain, before you knocked on my door, you knew what I was to you. He did not deny it. How long? Sable demanded. The seers identified you 14 months ago, Caldress said. His voice was steady, but something strained beneath it. They told me the wolf who could break the curse was an Omega living alone in the Grey Winter Range, rejected, unbonded. He paused. They also told me she was my mate. I did not tell you last night, he continued, because I needed you to choose to come based on what is at stake for my people. Not because of what you are to me. That would not have been a choice. It would have been a trap. A trap, Sable repeated. You think telling a rejected Omega that the Alpha King of the Northern Reaches is her fated mate is a trap? I think it would have made it impossible for you to say no, Caldress said. And I told you I would not take your choice from you. She stared at him. Her wolf was screaming inside her chest, clawing toward him with a hunger that made her vision swim. She had spent 3 years numb, hollowed out, her wolf silent and sleeping, and now everything was on fire. I need you to stay away from me, Sable said. Something flickered across his face. A flash of hurt that he buried immediately, but she saw it. As you wish, he said quietly. It took them 4 days to reach the capital. 4 days of walking through frozen wilderness, sleeping in makeshift camps with a fire between them and 10 wolves, forming a perimeter in the dark. 4 days during which Caldress spoke to her only when necessary and kept the distance she had demanded. It was the worst 4 days of her life, not because of the cold or the exhaustion or the blisters forming on her heels where her boots had cracked. Those were familiar hardships. What nearly broke her was the proximity. He was right there, 12 feet away by the fire every night, and her wolf dragged her out of sleep and toward him with a force that made her dig her fingernails into her own palms hard enough to draw blood. She did not go to him. She would not go to him. She was not going to let some mystical bond decide her future because the last time she had trusted fate had thrown her away. But on the 3rd night, something happened. Sable woke to the sound of wolves whimpering. Not the natural wolves of the mountain, but the shifter wolves, the soldiers. And they were gathered around Caldress in a tight circle, pressing their bodies against him. He was sitting up, his back against a fallen log, his face tipped toward the sky. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring at nothing. What is wrong with him? Sable asked, scrambling to her feet. One of the wolves shifted. The man who emerged was lean and sharp-featured, with close-cropped silver hair and the bearing of someone who had spent his entire life following orders he did not question. It happens when he pushes too far, he said. His voice was flat and practiced, the voice of someone who had explained this before. The curse affects him differently than the others. It does not take his wolf. It takes his strength. His body shuts down when he overtaxes himself. How long does it last? Sable asked, already moving toward Caldress. Hours. Sometimes a full day. The man paused. He walked 6 days through a blizzard to reach you. He has not rested properly in weeks. Sable knelt beside Caldress. His skin was gray in the firelight, his breathing shallow, and up close she could see what she had not allowed herself to notice before. The hollows beneath his cheekbones, the bruised shadows under his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands that never fully stopped. He was not just tired, he was dying. The curse was eating him alive, and he had spent what little strength he had left climbing a mountain to find her. She reached for his hand before she could stop herself. The moment her fingers closed around his eyes focused. He looked at her, really looked at her, and the rawness in his expression made her breath catch. You should be sleeping, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. You should be in a healer's ward, she shot back. The corner of his mouth twitched. It was not a smile, not quite. But it was close enough that her wolf settled slightly in her chest. "Stubborn Omega," he murmured. "Stupid Alpha," she replied. She did not let go of his hand. She sat beside him through the rest of the night, her shoulder pressed against his, and told herself it was practical. Body heat, survival, nothing more. His breathing steadied within minutes of her touch. The tremor in his hands stopped. The color returned to his face in slow degrees, like dawn creeping across a valley floor. In the morning, he was standing before she woke, fully dressed, giving orders to his wolves like nothing had happened. But when his gaze found hers across the camp, she saw something in it that had not been there before: gratitude. And beneath it, barely concealed, a longing so vast it made her look away. They reached Thornhaven on the 4th day. The city rose from the valley like something carved from the mountain itself, dark stone and iron and smoke. The gates opened before they arrived, and people lined the streets in silence, watching their king return with a stranger at his side. Sable felt every stare like a blade against her skin. An Omega, a nobody. Walking beside the Alpha King into a city full of wolves who would smell her weakness the moment she stepped through the gate. A woman was waiting in the courtyard of the palace, tall, silver-haired, with sharp dark eyes that missed nothing. "So this is her," the woman said, studying Sable the way a surgeon studies a wound. "Dean Sable, this is Fenwick," Caldress said. "My chief healer and the one who has been keeping me alive." "Barely," Fenwick corrected. "You look half-starved. You smell like pine sap and desperation, and your wolf is so agitated I can sense her from here." She paused. "You will do." Sable followed Fenwick into the palace, and tried not to think about the fact that the Alpha King's hand had brushed hers as she passed, and her wolf had purred for the first time in 3 years. In the morning, Fenwick took her to the infirmary. Sable was not prepared for what she found there. The room was long and lined with cots, and every cot was occupied. Men and women of varying ages, some sitting up, some lying still, all of them wearing the same expression. It was a look she recognized because she had worn it herself for 3 years. The look of someone whose wolf had gone silent. A girl sat on the nearest cot, no older than 8 or 9, her knees drawn to her chest, her eyes fixed on the wall. Her mother sat beside her, holding her hand, and the desperation on the woman's face was so raw that Sable had to look away. 341 now, Fenwick said quietly, watching Sable's reaction. 29 more since the king left to find you. What does it feel like? Sable asked, her voice rough. When the wolf goes silent? Like drowning in air, the girl's mother said, and Sable realized she had been overheard. She woke up screaming one morning, said her wolf was gone. Just gone. The woman's voice cracked. She has not shifted since. Sable crouched beside the girl's cot. The child looked at her with enormous dark eyes that held no hope, just exhaustion and a grief too large for her small frame. What is your name? Sable asked. Livia, the girl whispered. Sable reached out slowly and took the girl's hand. She did not know what she expected to happen. She did not expect to feel anything at all. But the moment her skin touched Livia's, something lurched inside her chest. Her wolf surged forward, not toward Caldress this time, but toward the child. Toward the empty, silent place where Livia's wolf should have been. Sable gasped. It was like reaching into dark water and feeling something brush against her fingertips. Something alive and struggling and trapped just below the surface. She is still there, Sable breathed. Fenwick moved closer. What? Her wolf. She is not gone. She is buried. Smothered. Like something is sitting on top of her, pressing her down. The wolf is fighting to get free, but the weight is too heavy. When she opened her eyes, Fenwick was staring at her with an expression Sable had never seen on the healer's composed face. Something between shock and ferocious hope. No one else has been able to feel them, Fenwick said, her voice barely controlled. Not the seers, not the mystics, not even the king. Sable looked down at Livia, who was staring up at her with wide, trembling eyes. "You can feel her?" the girl asked, her voice cracking. "You can feel my wolf?" "She is right there," Sable said, squeezing the girl's hand. "She has not left you. She is fighting." Livia burst into tears. Her mother wrapped her arms around her daughter and pressed her face into the girl's hair, her own shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Sable stood on unsteady legs. She could feel it now that she was paying attention. Not just Livia's wolf, but the others. Every silenced wolf in this room was a point of pressure at the edge of her awareness, a muffled howl just below the threshold of hearing. Dozens of them, trapped and suffocating and screaming for help that nobody had been able to hear. Until now. "I need to see the king," Sable said. Fenwick nodded. "He is in the council chamber. I will take you." The council chamber was a vast circular room built from dark stone, with a vaulted ceiling supported by pillars carved to look like wolves standing on their hind legs. A long table dominated the center, and around it sat a dozen men and women who all looked up when Sable entered. Caldrus sat at the head of the table. He looked worse than he had on the mountain. His face was drawn, his skin carrying that gray undertone that Sable now understood was the curse consuming him from the inside. But his eyes sharpened when he saw her, and she felt the bond flare between them like a held breath. "I can feel them," Sable said, without preamble. "The wolves. They are not gone. They are trapped. Something is holding them down, smothering them, and I can sense where they are." The council erupted. Voices overlapped, questions fired from every direction, but Caldrus raised one hand and the room went silent. "Can you reach them?" he asked. Just that. His voice was calm, but through the bond she could feel the force of what that question cost him. Hope was a dangerous thing for a man who had been fighting a losing war for 2 years. "I do not know," Sable said honestly. "I felt Livia's wolf. I felt her fighting. But feeling and freeing are not the same thing." Caldrus studied her for a long moment. Then he stood. "Show me," he said. They returned to the infirmary together. The council followed, but Caldrus stopped them at the door with a look that could have frozen a river solid. "Just us," he said, and the door closed. Inside, he led her to a cot near the far wall where a young man lay motionless, his eyes open but empty. A soldier, judging by the scars on his arms. "Tarvin," Caldrus said quietly, and the way he said the name told Sable everything. This was not just a subject. This was someone he knew. Someone he had failed. Sable knelt beside the cot and placed her hand on the soldier's arm. The sensation came faster this time, a rush of awareness that pulled her focus inward and down, past the surface, past the silence, into the place where Tarvin's wolf was buried. She found him. A massive gray wolf, curled tight, his muzzle tucked beneath his paws, surrounded by a darkness that pressed against him from every direction. The wolf was not sleeping. He was enduring. "I see him," Sable whispered. Caldrus knelt beside her. She could feel his presence through the bond, the heat of him, the desperate hope he was trying to contain. And then something happened that she did not expect. The darkness around Tarvin's wolf shifted. It noticed her. Not like a passive thing disturbed by movement, but like a sentient force that had been waiting, watching. It turned its attention toward her. And the cold that washed over Sable was not physical. It was the cold of something ancient and deliberate and hungry, and it whispered in a voice that was not a voice. "You should not be here, little wolf." Sable wrenched her hand away from Tarvin's arm and stumbled backward. Her breathing came in sharp, ragged gasps. Her hands were shaking. "What happened?" Caldrus was on his feet, his hands on her shoulders, steadying her. "Sable, what did you see?" She looked up at him, her face white. "The curse," she said. "It is not a thing. It is alive." Fenwick's study was a cluttered, firelit room buried in the lowest level of the palace. Sable sat in a chair that was too large for her, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she had not touched, and tried to stop shaking. "It spoke to me," Sable said. "Not words exactly. More like a pressure, a thought pushed into my mind. It knew I was there. It did not want me there." "The binding stone," Fenwick said slowly. "We assumed the curse was residual, an echo left behind when the relic shattered. But if what you are describing is accurate, then the curse is not an echo. It is an entity. Something that was trapped inside the stone and released when it broke." "Can it be killed?" Caldress asked. His voice was flat and controlled, but through the bond Sable could feel the storm beneath it. Fenwick pulled down an ancient leather-bound journal. Mathis Grieve, a scholar who studied the binding stones 3 centuries ago. According to his records, each stone contained what he called a hollow, a parasitic entity that feeds on the bond between wolf and shifter. She looked up. He also documented the only known method of destroying one. A wolf who carries the bond in its purest form must enter the hollow's domain and sever its connection to the territory. The bond, in its purest form. Your bond with your wolf was broken, Sable. Completely. And you rebuilt it alone, without pack, without an alpha, without anyone. A forged bond is the only thing a hollow cannot consume. "So I need to enter this thing's territory," Sable said. "It means going where the wolves go when they are taken, into the dark." "No," Caldress said. Both women looked at him. "You are asking her to walk directly into the thing that is destroying my people, alone, with nothing but a theory from a 300-year-old journal." "I am asking her to do what no one else can," Fenwick corrected. "She felt Livia's wolf in seconds. She made contact with the hollow itself. No one else has come close." "I will do it," Sable said. Caldress turned to her. "You do not know what it will do to you." "I know what it is doing to them," Sable said. 341 wolves trapped in silence, children who wake up screaming because half of them has been ripped away. I know what that feels like, Caldress. I lived it for 3 years. His expression fractured. She had used his name. Not his title, not your majesty. His name. And the way it landed between them, intimate and deliberate, made something shift in the air. "I cannot lose you," he said, and the words came out raw, stripped of every defense. "I just found you." Sable's chest ached. Her wolf pressed toward him so hard it hurt. "Then help me," she said. "Do not stop me. Help me." The silence stretched. Caldress looked at her with those pale winter eyes, and she watched the war play out across his face. The king fighting the mate, duty fighting terror. The man who had walked 6 days through a blizzard to find her now being asked to send her into the dark. "What do you need?" he asked finally, and the defeat in his voice was the most painful thing she had ever heard. They spent 3 days preparing. Fenwick pored over Grieve's journal, mapping what little was known about the hollow's domain. Sable spent hours in the infirmary, sitting with the silenced wolves, learning to feel the shape of the darkness that held them. Each time she reached toward a buried wolf, the hollow noticed her faster, pushed back harder. It was learning her. But she was learning it too. She discovered that the curse was not uniform. Some wolves were buried deeper than others. The children were closest to the surface, their bond still new and resilient, fighting hardest. The older wolves, the ones who had been silenced longest, were being pulled down steadily into a darkness so dense Sable could barely feel them at all. "It is digesting them," she told Fenwick on the second night, her voice hollow. "Absorbing the bond energy, feeding on it. The longer they stay trapped, the less there is left to save." Fenwick's face tightened. "How long do they have?" Sable swallowed. "The oldest cases? Weeks. Maybe less." That night she could not sleep. She lay in her narrow bed in the healer's wing and stared at the ceiling, her mind churning through everything she knew and everything she did not. The hollow was alive and aware. It was ancient. It was hungry. And tomorrow, she was going to walk into its mouth. Her wolf paced restlessly, pressing her toward the east wing, toward Caldress. Sable lasted until midnight. Then she got up, pulled on her boots, and walked through the dark corridors of the palace until she stood outside his door. She raised her hand to knock. The door opened before her knuckles touched wood. Caldress stood in the doorway, his shirt half unlaced, his dark hair loose around his face. He had not been sleeping either. She could see it in his eyes, the same raw, restless exhaustion she felt in her own bones. "I could feel you coming," he said quietly. "Through the bond. I have been feeling you all night." Sable stood in the corridor, her hands twisting together, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I am scared," she admitted. It came out small, and she hated how small it sounded, but it was true. Caldress reached for her. His hand cupped the side of her face, his thumb tracing along her cheekbone, and the touch was so gentle, so careful, that her eyes burned. "Come inside," he said. She stepped through the door. His chambers were spare, a soldier's room, a bed, a desk, a shield mounted on the wall. The fire had burned low, casting the space in amber and shadow. He closed the door behind her, and the click of the latch was the loudest sound in the world. She turned to face him. The firelight caught the scar along his jaw, and she reached up without thinking and traced it with her fingertip. He inhaled sharply through his nose, and she felt the shudder run through him like a current. "I do not know how to do this," Sable whispered. "I have never been wanted. Not by anyone. I do not know what this is supposed to feel like." Caldress's other hand came up to cradle her face. He held her like she was something precious, something he had been searching for across 6 mountain ranges and 2 years of his life. "It feels like this," he said. He kissed her. Slow, deliberate, and devastating. His mouth moved against hers with a restraint that cost him everything. She could feel it through the bond, the trembling effort of holding back, of letting her choose the pace. She kissed him back, and the bond between them ignited. Not a gentle warmth, a wildfire. It roared through her chest and down her spine and into the soles of her feet, and for the first time in her life, Sable understood what it meant to belong somewhere. She pulled back, breathless. His forehead rested against hers. "Tomorrow," she said. "After tomorrow, if I come back." "When you come back," he corrected, his voice rough. She slept in his bed that night, curled against his side with his arm around her waist and his heartbeat beneath her ear. They did not cross the line she had drawn. He held her, and she let herself be held, and for the first time in 3 years, Sable's wolf went quiet. Not silent, not dormant, but quiet. Content. She dreamed of dark water and the sound of wolves howling beneath the surface, and even in sleep, her hand tightened around his. In the morning, she woke to find him already dressed, standing by the window, looking out at the pale gray sky. "It is time," he said. Sable rose, dressed, and followed him to the infirmary, where Fennec was waiting with the journal open and a circle of candles burning on the stone floor. "Lie down," Fenwick instructed, gesturing to a cot placed in the center of the circle. "When you are ready, reach for the wolves the way you have been doing. But this time, do not pull back when the hollow pushes. Follow it down. Go where the wolves are being held." Sable lay on the cot. The candlelight flickered against the ceiling. She could hear her own breathing, too fast, too shallow. She could feel Caldress beside her, his hand gripping hers so tightly his knuckles had gone white. "I will be here," he said. "Right here." She closed her eyes, reached inward, reached down. The darkness swallowed her whole. The first thing she felt was the cold, not winter cold, not mountain cold. This was the cold of absence, of a place where warmth had never existed and never would. It seeped into her skin, her muscles, her marrow, settling into her bones like something that intended to stay. Sable opened her eyes, or thought she did. The distinction did not seem to matter here. She stood on a vast flat plain of black stone that stretched in every direction without end. Above her, there was no sky, just a pressing gray void that hung close enough to touch, heavy and suffocating. The air tasted of iron and grief. There was no wind, no sound, nothing except the faint, distant vibration of something breathing, something enormous. "Hello?" she called. Her voice did not echo. It fell from her mouth and died at her feet, swallowed by the stone. Sable walked. She did not know which direction was correct, because there were no landmarks, no horizon, no differentiation between one step and the next. The ground beneath her feet was smooth and cold and faintly pulsing, like the surface of a living thing pretending to be stone. Then she heard them. Faint at first, so faint she thought it was her own heartbeat. But it grew as she walked, separating into distinct threads of sound, whimpering, scratching. The thin, exhausted howls of wolves who had been crying out for so long their voices had worn down to almost nothing. Sable broke into a run. The sound led her to a depression in the stone, a vast shallow bowl sunk into the plain like a crater. She skidded to the edge and looked down, and what she saw drove the air from her lungs. Wolves. Hundreds of them. Pressed flat against the bottom of the bowl, their bodies pinned by a darkness that moved over them like liquid, flowing into their fur, their mouths, their eyes. Some were still struggling, their legs twitching, their claws scraping against the stone. Others had gone still, their bodies wrapped so tightly in the dark that she could barely make out their shapes. And in the center of the bowl, sitting upright with its head tilted like a curious dog, was the hollow. It was not what she had expected. She had imagined something monstrous, something with claws and teeth and the kind of theatrical menace that belonged in a nightmare. What she found was worse. The hollow looked like a wolf. An enormous wolf made of smoke and shadow, with eyes that burned like cold stars. It was beautiful in the way that deep water is beautiful, the way a cliff edge is beautiful, the kind of beauty that exists only to lure you closer to something that will kill you. It smiled. Wolves should not be able to smile, but this one did, and the expression was knowing and patient and utterly devoid of mercy. "The little wolf returns," it said. The voice came from everywhere, from the stone, from the air, from inside Sable's own skull. "I wondered when you would come." Every instinct she had screamed at her to run, to claw her way back to the surface, to wake up in the infirmary with Caldress's hand in hers and never come back to this place again. But below her, a small wolf near the edge of the bowl lifted its head. A wolf she recognized. Livia's wolf. Still fighting. Still trying. "Let them go," Sable said. The hollow laughed. The sound was like glass grinding against glass. "Why would I do that? They are mine. They were given to me. Your king's commander brought the stone into the capital. He broke the seal. He opened the door. What walks through an open door does not steal. It enters." The hollow's burning eyes fixed on her. "And now I am here. And I am fed. And I have no intention of leaving." Sable's wolf surged inside her chest, pressing forward with a ferocity she had never felt, not toward the hollow, toward the trapped wolves below. "You cannot free them," the hollow said, reading her intent. "You are one wolf. I hold 300. Your bond, remarkable as it is not strong enough to break mine." "You do not know what my bond can do," Sable said. "I know exactly what it can do." The hollow stood, and its shadow stretched across the bowl like a stain spreading through the water. "I have been watching you since the moment you touched the first child. I know the shape of you. Forged, not born. Rebuilt from nothing. Fascinating." It padded closer, its movements fluid and wrong, like something wearing the idea of a wolf without understanding how a wolf was supposed to move. "But you are still an Omega," it continued. You are still the wolf they threw away. And deep down, beneath the fire and the stubbornness and the 3 years of pretending you do not need anyone, you believe they were right to discard you." The words landed like a blade between her ribs. Sable's breath hitched, her vision blurred, because it was true. She had carried it with her up the mountain and through every winter and into every sleepless night. The quiet, poisonous certainty that Cresswell had been right. That she was nothing. That no amount of survival or strength or forged bonds could change the fundamental fact that she had been weighed and measured and found worthless by the people who had known her best. "There it is," the hollow whispered. "The crack in the foundation." Sable's knees buckled. The hollow's darkness crept toward her, tendrils of shadow reaching for her ankles, her wrists, the unmarked skin of her neck where a bond mark should have been. "You cannot save them," the hollow said, "because you have never believed you were worth saving yourself." The darkness touched her skin, and it was like falling into ice water. Sable felt it pour into her, pressing against her wolf with a suffocating weight. Her vision dimmed. The hollow's voice echoed through her like a second pulse. "Rest now, little wolf. You have fought so hard for so long, you can stop." And part of her wanted to. The exhausted, broken, 9-year-old orphan part of her that had never stopped grieving. The part that had stood in that ceremonial hall and heard the words that defined her and believed them. That part wanted to lie down on the cold stone and let the darkness take her. Then she felt him. Not beside her. Not in this place. But through the bond, distant and desperate, a lifeline stretched taut across whatever boundaries separated the hollow from the living world. Caldress. She could feel his hand still gripping hers in the infirmary. She could feel his terror, his fury, the raw, anguished refusal to let her go. And beneath his presence, something smaller, fainter. A tiny thread of warmth that she recognized. Livia. The girl was reaching for her from inside the bowl, her small wolf pressing upward through the darkness with everything she had left. Reaching for Sable the way a drowning child reaches for a hand. "You can feel her," Sable whispered. "You can feel my wolf." The girl's words from the infirmary came back to her, full of wonder and trembling hope. And suddenly, Sable understood. The hollow was right about one thing. She could not overpower it. She was one Omega, small and scared and carrying a wound that had never properly healed. But the hollow was wrong about everything else, because the wound was not a weakness. It was the reason she was here. She had been severed from her wolf, from her pack, from every connection that was supposed to define her. She had been stripped to nothing, and from nothing, she had rebuilt, not because she was special or chosen or destined for greatness, but because she was too stubborn to stop breathing and too angry to die on a mountain that did not care whether she lived or not. The bond she carried was not pristine. It was scarred, rough-edged, imperfect. But it was hers. She had made it. And it was unbreakable, because it had already been broken once, and she had forged it again with her bare hands. Sable stood up. The darkness pressed against her, but she pushed back. Not with force, with recognition. She reached for her wolf, the wolf who had been silent for 3 years, the wolf who had woken on a mountain ridge at the sight of a man with Winter River eyes, and she did not command her. She simply opened the door and let her through. Her wolf surged forward, not like an attack, like a howl, like a beacon, like a bonfire lit on a dark plain where nothing had burned for centuries. The light was not dramatic. It was the quiet, steady warmth of a fire built by hands that knew how to coax a flame from nothing. It spread outward from Sable's chest in waves, rolling across the stone, pouring into the bowl like sunrise filling a valley. The first wolf it touched was Livia's. The small wolf jerked upright, the darkness peeling away from her fur like frost melting in sunlight. She shook herself, stumbled, found her footing, and howled. The sound was raw and thin and beautiful, and it cracked something open in the air. The next wolf stirred. Then another. Then another. The hollow screamed. It was the sound of something ancient realizing for the first time that it was not the most powerful thing in the room. "You cannot do this," it snarled. "You are nothing. You were discarded. You were rejected." "Yes," Sable said. "I was." She walked forward, into the bowl, down among the wolves. The darkness recoiled from her. Wolves rose around her as she passed, shaking off the shadow, their howls joining Livia's until the air was thick with sound. "I was rejected," Sable continued, her voice steady, each word landing like a stone thrown into still water. "I was abandoned. I was told I was worthless by people I had loved my entire life, and I believed them. For years, I believed them." She stopped in front of the hollow. "But I was wrong. And so were they. Being thrown away does not make you worthless. It makes you free. And I am free." She reached into the center of the hollow's chest, into the root that anchored it to the land and the wolves, and the bonds it had been feeding on. She grabbed it, and she pulled. The hollow shrieked. The plain cracked beneath her feet. The gray void above fractured like ice on a frozen lake, and through the cracks, light poured in. Warm and golden and smelling of cedar and pine and the cold, clean air of a mountain morning. The wolves were running, hundreds of them, streaming out of the bowl, their howls rising into a chorus that shook the ground. The hollow's form was disintegrating, shadows peeling away like ash in the wind. "You will carry this," it hissed, its voice fading. "You will carry what I was, the memory of me. You will never be free of it." "I have carried worse," Sable said. The plane shattered, the void collapsed, and Sable fell through the light with the sound of 300 wolves howling her home. She opened her eyes in the infirmary. The candles had burned down to nothing. The room was full of people. Wolves were howling somewhere in the palace. Real wolves. Shifted wolves. Their voices shaking the stone walls. And Caldress was on his knees beside the cot, her hand still in his face wet with tears. "Sable," he said, and her name in his mouth was a prayer and a broken thing, and the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. She reached up and touched his face. "I told you I would come back." He pulled her against his chest so hard she could not breathe, and she wrapped her arms around him and held on. And around them the palace erupted with the sound of wolves finding their voices again. The bond was sealed 3 weeks later, in a ceremony that broke every tradition the Northern Reaches had ever observed. An Omega as the Alpha King's mate, a packless foundling standing beside the most powerful wolf on the continent. The whispers were ferocious, and Sable heard every single one of them, and she did not care. They stood in the palace courtyard with snow falling on their shoulders and 300 wolves watching, some in human form, some shifted. Livia stood in the front row, grinning so wide her face looked like it might split in half, and when the mating bite was given and the bond locked into place, the girl howled first. The rest followed. 300 voices rising into the winter sky, shaking the snow from the pines, echoing off the mountains that surrounded the valley. Sable felt the bond settle into her chest like a second heart. She looked up at Caldress, who was looking down at her with an expression that made every year on the mountain, every frozen night, every moment of loneliness and doubt worth the cost. "They are going to talk about this for centuries," he said. "Good," Sable replied. That night she stood at the window and watched the snow fall over Thornhaven. Behind her, Caldress slept deeply, his breathing even, his body finally free of the gray exhaustion that had been consuming him for 2 years. She thought about a crooked cabin on a mountain, a stolen bedroll, a girl who had been told she was nothing. She thought about how far that girl had walked, and how much further she still had to go, and how the road ahead was no longer empty. Sable climbed back into bed. Caldress shifted in his sleep, his arm finding her waist, pulling her close on instinct. She closed her eyes. For the first time in 3 years, she was not surviving. She was home. Thank you so much for listening. I will see you very soon for the next one.